Republicans dead. Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay?
The women with the least likelihood of getting pregnant are the ones most worried about having abortions.
On January 6th of 2021, you had tens of thousands of people peacefully protesting.
No, it's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real.
Hey, folks. Welcome back to the Enemies List podcast. I'm your host, as always, Rick Wilson. I am joined today by the brilliant Jason Stanley. Jason is a guy who has studied the politics of language and the language of politics, if I can sort of loop that back around on itself. Wrote a great book a while back that I absolutely love called How Fascism Works, and has also written a book called How Propaganda Works. But I wanted to have Jason on today because we are in the middle of a moment right now where the tools of propaganda and communication and language and politics have all merged with this monstrous sort of nationalist movement, and a moment where AI and art and the tools of communication and social media platforms have all run together into a gigantic, ugly mass. And I'm curious today, and I want to have a conversation with you, Jason, about where you see the use and abuse of language right now in our culture. And I don't just mean by Donald Trump and Fox and the sort of MAGA right, but more broadly. And how should we be thinking about what we're hearing and what we're seeing every day in this moment in this very chaotic moment in history?
Right. So we've got a lot of trolling happening. So that's one thing to realize, is that you've got a far right movement that's really enjoying extremism and signs of extremism and trolling with extremism. The Musks doing this, right? Elon Musk is it's the online far right that has spilled into the world, right? So
sure.
Every time you say, okay, look at what their big game, the master move of politics is do something that is extreme, like extremely far right, fascist, Nazi adjacent, or just Nazi, and then deny you're doing it and laugh. So the media, the media obviously gets sucked into that, because how can you not? Because it is news. If Musk is making a Nazi salute, that is news. On the other hand, he wants you to treat it like that, so he can laugh at you. And so we're seeing an international, global far right link. So Musk, we're seeing some connections between strategies here that would have obvious repercussions internationally. Here's what I mean. I'm thinking of the Alternative für Deutschland in Germany, which is saying, we don't want to make Germans feel guilty about their history. Germans are a great people. Why do we have to think about the Holocaust all the time? Were the Nazis really so bad? They're understandable in their place. So that was an obvious repercussion of what we were doing with race.
Sure.
Here. So we're seeing in this globalized communication world, we're seeing these global strategies. And that's why in each country after country, it looks like people are just applying the same playbook over and over and over again. So I think we just have a different. Things are much less local than they used to be because of these global communication systems, because of communication between these different autocratic far right movements. And we have sort of cookie cutter strategies. And one thing that's interesting to me is how much people fail to realize that what they're seeing locally is sort of a global playbook.
That is something I think people in America in particular don't have a real feel for, that the connectivity between the American populist, nationalist, Bannonist tendency flows out and to and from the Orbans of the world, the AfD folks in the world, all these people that are emerging in the space where they've taken one or two issues, almost universally now, immigration being the key enabling technology, I think, of nationalism and populism in the last 20 years. You're seeing that right now with AFD saying we're going to remigrate everyone. They're all going home, which is a lot like Trump did back in 2020. They're all going home. They all have to go back to where they're from, et cetera, et cetera. And I just find that I think that's a fascinating failure mode of liberal democracies, that they didn't understand just how powerful that issue would become as they faced up to these growing movements around the globe.
That's right. I mean, that's the kind of template. We know that that the idea of foreigners, the idea of there's certain tropes that work politically. The idea that invaders are here and displacing you, that works everywhere. Modi, the Hindu nationalists, are doing it in India. The Muslims are invaders. We've got to send them back to Bangladesh. So this structure psychologically works. Of course, there are very real economic issues facing the world and under globalization, but they don't have to do with immigrants. They have to do with the people who are funding this politics, the tech feudalists, the sort of enormous amount of profits that's going to a few billionaires for creating technology that displaces people, that removes people. And they redirect that anger away from the Elon Musks, away from the Jeff Bezoses, to invaders, and that works basically everywhere. Or you direct, if you don't have a lot of immigrants, you can direct it against LGBTQ citizens. You can say, oh, they're targeting your families, but it's a general politics. There is legitimate and serious concern about the effects of globalization. But then you have these standard targets that fascist politics works on: immigrants, LGBTQ people, chosen minorities like Muslims in India. And that kind of politics just works. It works because when there's an underlying level of resentment, it's a sort of easy target. And like if you take an ideal scapegoat are trans people, because there's so few of them. So pick a group where there's hardly any of them and say the nation's problems are that. So what we're seeing kind of playbook, textbook policies politics that work on a resentful and aggrieved population to direct their attention away from the billionaires who are reaping all the benefits of the technological advances that disempower people.
I was sharing an article with a friend of mine that a quote from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, the company that powers all of this AI innovation right now. They build the chipset, the H100, that is used for almost all these AI models. And Jensen Huang said, look, in 10 years, nothing will not be AI or robotically done. And it was a very blithe sort of comment. It's a very sort of offhand comment. I sent it to an economist friend of mine who was a conservative, by the way. And he said, I'm going long on guillotines. And I was like, yeah, because the idea right now of, the brown person took your job, which is, unless you're in stoop labor, construction, or a handful of other areas where a lot of folks don't want to work, they didn't take your job. It's a made up story. It is a fantasy built by the right. But in 10 years, if you're an attorney or a insurance adjuster or an accountant or a nurse, it's going to be a lot harder to hate a robot than it is to hate a Mexican or to hate a Guatemalan or a Honduran or whomever. This moment that we're in right now of fundamental alteration of the American government towards a much more authoritarian, autocratic, and I think you and I would agree, an overtly more fascist model that looks a lot more like Italy than Germany in the World War II era.
Now it's looking like that, right? With the marriage of corporate and state power.
Exactly. The idea, that was my first thought when Trump went in and announced that $500 billion deal. I was like, and when he was talking about how America should own 50% of TikTok, I was like, this is straight out of the Evola, not Ebola people, Italian fascist corporatism in
It's
the
much
1930s.
more moving. It used to be in Trump's first term, people would object to my calling Trumpism fascism because they would say, "Where's the corporatism?" Well,
Right.
here you go. Where's the
Voila!
Here you go. You know.
It is, and I do think, to look back on the very beginning, the idea that the right likes to troll on the Hitler front, on the authoritarian front. Ha ha ha! I was making that salute to troll the libs. It is a harder set of denials for them when it comes down to this overt and really fundamental alteration of what was Republican policy about, you wanted free markets, you wanted government and corporate worlds to stay as far apart as possible in every way, in regulatory areas, in corporate, regulatory capture, all those things. But now, I mean, it just astounds me how quickly and how malleable all these folks were about changing what they said was a fundamental economic principle, because, this is not the F.A. Hayek I remember. This
is what we're looking at is though I don't want to valorize all of Hayek's political choices. I like him philosophically in many respects. He's for us lefties, he's like the brilliant, the one we respect. But his he was a bit too on Chile, but
yeah, I know.
So
things got off the rails.
Right, things got off the rails. But yeah, we're facing a kind of cartoonish authoritarianism. It's a sort of kleptocratic authoritarianism where we're supposed to pretend has some. Bannon is like, no, this is the wonderful far right future. No, this is a kleptocratic. The settlement by CBS, staggering. That they're considering settling, which is just a bribe, right? It's just
straight up bribe.
Straight up bribe. And I can see that Trump is thinking, my guess is that he's thinking, well, don't you want, I'm the man, I should be the richest man too. Like it's just, the whole system is crumbling so quickly towards this kind of, okay, we're in authoritarianism now. That's our daddy. He calls the shots. Now, I don't know how much Musk seems to be in charge as well. I don't know. It's up for grabs who's running what. But
right.
But you certainly have tons of money is going to be passing. It's going to be going into the pockets of Trump and Musk. So and then we have businesses. Timothy Snyder's concept of anticipatory obedience is really having a moment right now.
It is interesting how angry Bannon is about how easily Trump got played by this oligarch class. Bannon is furious about it. He is raging. How dare that Trump not understand that we're the ones who put him there, not Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg. And anything that makes Steve Bannon unhappy, I'm generally in favor of.
Yeah. I'm sympathetic with his hostility towards techno-feudalism. But
same.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, one of those things that I wonder if we're in sort of a terrible race right now between the nationalism and the techno-feudalism, without a real prominent liberal Western democracy alternative, without a prominent modernist alternative to those things. And look, modern neoliberalism has its flaws too. Some rather glaring, but But the two outcomes that seem to be like this, it's a race between two completely unsavory options: neo feudalism and hyper populist, racially inflected nationalism.
Exactly. those are the so if those are the three models, we're in big trouble. you know, but we don't know if people are always talking about the Democrats need a leader, but they don't seem to have adjusted to the new reality. I mean, what you see in a lot of countries. Look at So I spend a lot of time in Ukraine lately, going again in June, and a politician there, who I won't mention, not Zelensky, said to me, you Americans think that the person Eastern European autocrats admire the most is Putin. That's not true. They admire Netanyahu because Netanyahu has stayed in power forever and convinced the world that it's a democracy. So he's like, that's everyone's goal, to get the majority of people saying, oh, it's a democracy, as long as possible while you sit in office forever. And so that's the model, like leaders sitting in office until they die. And then all the while normalizing it. So everyone's like, oh, it's a democracy. It's and this will happen. I mean, in a sense, we're lucky that Trump is so old. I mean, not in a sense, in every sense, we're lucky
Right.
that our autocrat, is not going to be in office for 20 years. Because if he was 60, he'd be in office for 20 years.
Oh, let me tell you, if Trump was 60, I would be in a much higher state of anxiety about the future of the country, because he's lost a step, not just since 2016. He's lost a lot of steps since 2016. He's lost a step since middle of last year. He is not the same high energy, malefactor that he was in the beginning. I think he's surrounded by much smarter people now. And that is sort of one of the things about fascism that I think is another irony of for the right. Fascism is fundamentally bureaucratic. It requires state structures to monitor the behavior of individuals. It requires state structures to ensure compliance. It requires state structures to ensure an educational curriculum that serves the dear leader. Talk to me about the early moves that you're seeing here and how they compare with sort of classic and diet authoritarianism.
Right. So there's a lot of sort of cartoonish straightforwardness here. So my newest book is on education. It's called Erasing History, and it's about it's about the it's noteworthy. Like when I was writing the book, last year, people were like, well, why are you focusing on this? Isn't it going to be autocracy, authoritarianism? And I was like, you Americans need to understand that one of the first targets is the education system. And that's what we're seeing. I think people were surprised. Well, why is he focusing so much on universities and K through 12 education? But that has been a primary focus. That, Vladimir Putin recently said wars are won by teachers. So if you think in your mind about, picture a cartoonish authoritarian country in your head.
Sure. Kreplakistan.
Right.
Make it up.
In Kreplakistan, the schools are like, Kreplakistan is the greatest nation that ever existed. Kreplakistan was great in the past, and its greatness will shine forth in history. The point of education is to learn about Kreplakistan's greatness and the evils of Kreplakistan's enemies.
Right.
The purpose of the education system is to make you hate those, the internal enemy who seeks to overturn Kreplakistan's great leadership. Well, this is the patriotic education initiative that Trump that the Trumpists, the structure, wants us to swallow, because this mythic past, the structure of the mythic past, the greatness of the mythic past, and that's essential in this ideological structure, because then you can represent internal enemies, or those who seek to criticize the mythic past, external immigration, seeks to change the character of the nation. So this is, and of course, where are the critical voices going to come from? The critical voices are going to come from the university and the press. So Trump's won in Trump's first term. He recognizes the intelligence agencies, there's areas within the government of independence. So that's his first target, and the courts. The next target is the press and the universities. So that's just cartoon. It's straightforward. You cannot there are no liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries. Just what institution doesn't exist in authoritarian countries? Humanities programs. And when you have a liberal free society, you're going to have people in liberal arts colleges where people are criticizing everything. Mm-hmm. And some of it is going to sound wacky, but sure, that's just how freedom works, So
right. Right.
So when you go after the media,
that's a feature, not a bug.
That's a feature, not a bug. If you don't have wacky courses that you don't agree with, you don't have a free society. And you're supposed to like one of the things that, one of the difficulties in countering the education component, which I do in my newest book, is there's all this stuff. They try to present it in a completely, ignorant way. So they're like, we're going to bring classical education back to preserve the nuclear family. Plato in the Republic says all kids should be removed from their families. Right. Like Plato in the it's completely normal in the classical world for older men to seduce their younger students.
Right. Anybody think that's a great idea?
Exactly. So so it's hard, this propaganda war, like we're going to bring in classical education that will rescue the nuclear family. And it makes, for a scholar, it makes no sense at all. But it's just there to say, look, education systems are only there to preserve the status quo. Any critique of the status quo is going to be, everyone who's not on board with the Trumpist project is a Marxist. Mm-hmm. You're a Marxist, Rick. I didn't know.
Apparently so. I've been called a Marxist and a communist and a Satanist all at once. So.
Right, exactly. So all this is, we're not supposed to bring Hitler in, but it's exactly what the Nazis did. Everyone who was an enemy was a Marxist. Anyone who's in opposition is a Marxist. So you're seeing the education piece. Obviously, you're seeing the press piece. I don't need to go into the press is freaked out, and the press
rightly.
Yeah, and one of the things that's really annoying me about the press coverage, since it's a podcast I can vent, is the New York Times, in their obsequiousness, is constantly trying to say, so many of their columnists, like Bret Stephens or something, oh, we shouldn't have talked about fascism, we shouldn't have talked about authoritarianism, this was panicked, we should have talked about economic issues. But hey, those of us who are talking about authoritarianism, now it's turned out we were right.
The degree to which a certain class of what I call gentry conservatives they whipsaw back and forth on Trump, and they have now for 9 years, where one day they wake up and their eyes are clear and they say, good God, he is in fact an authoritarian. This is a disaster. Our national experiment is at risk. And then a few days later, they inevitably come back to say, well, obviously Ted Kennedy was much worse.
Right.
Or they find some imaginary demon in their catalog and they say, well, but the choice was between Trump and pure communism.
Right.
And as I always like to say, I don't know how many times when I was a Republican, I probably said the same cheap shit, throwaway stuff. Oh, Barack Obama's a socialist. If Barack Obama was a socialist, if Joe Biden was a communist, they were really terrible at their jobs. They were terrible at their jobs. If they were the part of the vanguard of the fucking revolution, they were not doing their work because capitalism prospered under both.
Marx recommends clearly recapitalizing the banks after they.
Right.
I think it's in the German ideology, right there in capital. Like when the bankers
Let
bankrupt,
them fail and compensate them for their failures.
exactly. Make sure they get their $6 million annual bonuses back.
Oh man!
So
But that idea, I think of these the gentry conservative types who dislike Trump aesthetically,
yeah,
who are so fundamentally frozen in this 1990s, early 2000s moment where they really believe that it's an existential decision between communism and Western democracy, or the American Republic. Let's be more precise about them. I find it bordering on tragic sometimes, because it really reflects an inability to see the scope of what is happening before their eyes. And right now we are really seeing all the maneuvering that you would want if you were trying to hold power indefinitely.
yeah. I mean, the denial of reality that's happening is stunning. We were told, right after the election, people said to me, see, you were just hysterical. And I didn't know why they said that. And then, like, Project 2025, the amount of MSNBC people were mocking MSNBC. Oh, come on, that will never happen. Now we're seeing every letter of Project 2025. Russell Vaught is running OMB. We're seeing exactly all the authoritarianism.
Well, and a lot of what you wrote about in Erasing History is in Project 2025 when it comes to the Department of Education.
Absolutely. It's just straightforwardly.
And
it's just, they're just simply doing Project 2025 as they said they would. And what's kind of wild is you can already see if Trump runs in 2028, the normalizers are going to say FDR held office for more than 2 terms.
Right.
And they're going to say this is real democracy. You can already see that. I even asked a friend of mine who's a normalizer. I said, what will you do if I said this to him in 2028, if Trump runs again, you'll say this is democracy in action. And he said, fair point. and of course, and that's what you do when you want one of these electoral autocracies. You want people to keep thinking it's a normal democracy. Like Netanyahu has been in power forever. Like,
I always think Russia's like the wrong example for folks, because
exactly
just Russian history is just so twisted up in so many different predicates. But this idea that any president would serve more than 2 terms in the modern era would have been laughed out of every single room.
Right.
But I presume part of their plan, and again, with your book, you talk about fascism requires the erasure of history. It requires that you live in the year 0 all the time.
Exactly.
I presume we're going to end up seeing kids basically being told it's not unusual. It's not weird. It's not scary. It's not abnormal. This just happens because people wanted Trump more.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, Trump will die in the White House unless he can have Don Jr. replace him. But it'll be that kind of system where it will take so many years. You have a structure around it that normalizes constantly, and then you have wishful thinking. So that's I think the CBS I keep waiting for a particular shoes to drop, like the CBS settlement. If that happens, it's so blatantly authoritarian, so blatantly corrupt, so blatantly shows that the whole system is just about. But I don't think it'll move people. I mean, unfortunately, of course, the people want to have the discussion that, okay, it's been in the past, look at what happened under Obama with the bankers, look at what happened with Bush under the Iraq war. Like, of course, there are bad things that happened in the past. We know that.
Abundant.
Abundance. But I was not for. I was really worried when Hillary Clinton ran or George Bush, this thing of relatives of former leaders running. I didn't like that as to what it suggested about my country. And I'm worried that's going to come back with like Don Jr. run.
I think, and there is, and unfortunately, and I hate this for myself, I am one of these anthropologists of Donald Trump, and so I've read everything about the guy. And there was a long period in the late '80s, mid to late '80s, and early '90s, where he was obsessed with royalty. He was obsessed with titles and seals. That's why Trump has the lion logo, and he had a family crest made. All this stuff that, on paper, you look at it back then and go, tacky rich guy.
No.
Now
Yeah.
you look at it as dynastic precursors for, Don Jr. to become, vice president if JD Vance gets out of line or something. I mean, and I say that not as a throwaway, but
no, you're
I think there'll
right.
be a point where Trump decides he's going to extend the family business indefinitely. They've already sort of built this this idolatry around Baron Trump, which blows my mind, but here we are.
Well, yeah, it is very much like a royal family. It is the structure. In fact, like people who disagree with me that we're witnessing the structure of fascism will agree that we're witnessing the structure of monarchy.
Yes.
That's the debate. Is it monarchy or fascism? So I think in the case of the beauty of the democratic system, and this is what I love about Ukraine, when Ukrainians fight, they want to replace their leaders by elections. So they don't want the same. They're in a neighborhood where nobody can replace their leaders and the leaders stay until they die, and they don't want that. With elections, with real elections, where you can, and I'm not talking about, some people listening to this will be like, hey, Hungary has real elections. Yeah, but the media is run by the government. So the information that people have, and a lot of Hungarians only speak Hungarian. And so they're not reading if you can replace your leaders by election, you're dealing with the problem that in an autocracy, be it a monarchy, be it a dictatorship, you don't have, which is the successor problem. It could be that we end up with JD Vance. It could be that we end up with Don Jr., but it's unclear because it's not going to work. The successor issue is not going to work as it should in a democracy.
Yeah. And that idea of Trump's incredible primacy in the Republican space of demanding obedience from people so that they can win their primaries and so that they can continue in office I think it will ramify down. I mean, there are plenty of people who chase a Don Jr. endorsement now. Yeah. Not many for Eric, but but there are plenty of people who I think will look at that and ironically, the country that was founded on a resistance to monarchy will end up de facto, if not de jure, drifting toward it again.
Yeah, monarchy is the system that dominated all of Europe for 2,000 years. So there's a kind of naturalness to monarchy. What there isn't a naturalness to is democracy, because democracy seems weak to people. It seems like wimpy. The politicians compromise. A monarchy, a strongman, he doesn't compromise. It's his way or the highway, and people like that. So,
right. Yeah, there is a degree of a sort of fetishization of the tough guy thing, which you see. Yeah, you see with Trump clearly.
In fact, the Spinoza formulates the problem of ideology as why do so many men willingly die so that one man may boast.
Right. Right.
So it's people will die for empty symbols. That's what history is all about. And so this idea that politics is material, it's about healthcare, it's about, you have to fight. That's the soul of a healthy democracy. When, that's what a union does. A union brings together KKK members and Black Panther members because they all hate the man.
Right.
And they want to raise, So when you make politics material, you make things healthy. And unfortunately, I think a lot of our politics right now, I think there are people who are oriented towards materiality. They want their economic well-being, and they're just mistaken about what's going to help them. They think immigrants are hurting them when they're not. So there's a lot of that going around, just deflecting from the real targets of misery of the billionaire class, of much of the billionaire class. But there's also just a lot of like desire to see, like, love of Trump, and desire to see, this feeling that the cultural elites hate Trump, so they're going to be humiliated if Trump is leader, and it doesn't matter what he does. The more kleptocratic he is, the more the liberal elite are going to be humiliated. And, I don't care if I die at 45, with no health care, as long as the liberal elite have to, like...
As long as I've owned the libs.
Exactly. Like, I had an interview with a Polish journalist right after Trump's election, and he said, when they announced Trump's victory in the parliament, the Law and Justice members stood up and cheered, and that's the right-wing party, the far-right autocratic party of Poland. And I said, that's crazy, because this means that Ukraine won't be supported, and Putin has an ally, and Poland is pro-Ukraine. They're anti-Russia. They're threatened by Russia. Putin is constantly rattling his sabers in Poland. And the journalist said, well, yeah, I mean, they don't care about Poland. They just want to own the libs.
That is, owning the libs is a superpower of the right these days. Well, I want to thank you again, my friend, for coming on today. Jason Stanley, folks, the author of the great book, Erasing History, and a number of other books, including How Fascism Works and How Propaganda Works. Read them. You will be enlightened. You will understand what the other side is doing in this great battle that we are in our time. Thank you so much for being on the show today. Tell folks where they can find you on social media.
I'm not on social media.
Aha! Winner! Good for you.
Here's the thing about an authoritarian society. I don't want to be followed.
There's a libertarian streak in you, my friend.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you for coming on the show. We'll see you again next time.
Take care.